Ruchim Abayim B'Shem Hashem, B'Shem Irgun Shir Torah. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yaakov Smith, Shlita, on Dini Machal Parve, the Parve food and Halacha. I would like to have the great Schuss sponsor in a shir call Irgun Shir Torah 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. Rav Smith.
I've always noticed that sometimes the most challenging questions in Hilchos Kashrus relate to Parve foods. What's the status of a Parve food? When does it lose its status as a Parve food? And I guess we could discuss in Yana Diyayma. You made latkes fried in a Fleishig pot. Can you add cream to that, milchigs to that? Challah that was baked in a Fleishig oven that's clean, can you have that with milchigs, the challah with milchigs? And of course in yeshiva, in a camp, these questions are all the time asked where the camp is serving Fleishigs and they have a big pot of lakshin and you want to take some lakshin out and add cheese. And if you eat plain lakshin, you have to wait 6 hours. In other words, there are parve foods that start to have a little twist to them. How do you look at the parve food when it's affected by something else? So as we always try to do, we have to try to find one yesod that will give us guidance for this sugya, and that's really a very simple yesod. And let's present it as follows. It's very well known, if you have a treifa piece of meat and you cook that together with potatoes, for example, so the potatoes become treif like the meat. You'll say, I look in the potatoes, I don't see any meat in the potatoes. There it says, of course, but there's no meat, but there's a tam basa, tam treif. After all, the potatoes absorb the taste of the treifa meat. And tam ke'ika, tam is like the real thing. So the potatoes become absolutely treif, so much so, we know the concept of chaticha nasa nevela. If you cook the potatoes with other food are also affected and become treif. Okay. Now let's move on to the next question. Let's say you have a situation where you cook treif in a pot. And you you scrub the pot. Now you have a clean pot. Can you cook food in that pot that just cooked treif? So of course we know that's a problem. Why is it a problem? The teretz is, and here we'll use this as a pot, when you cook something in a pot, there are bliyas that go into the wall. Bliyas are also tam. So there are very real moshes of bliyas in the wall. And now when you use this treifa pot and you cook some kosher food, the tarfus will connect with the kosher food and make a problem. If I'll give you a mashal, if you have orange juice on the table and you want to wipe it up, you take a sponge and you wipe up the orange juice. Now you look, you don't see any orange juice on the table. There's no orange juice in the sponge until you squeeze it out, of course. Then all the orange juice comes out. Well, that's bliyas. It's absorbed into the walls of the pot. When you cook it, cooking process is able to extract the bliyas from the wall. So now you have treifa bliyas going into the food. Okay. So that's the truth of bliyas from tam from two different angles. Now, of course, we can understand a little easier when you cook meat with potatoes, the potatoes is asa. But you have to have the right Torah eyeglasses to see that when you cook meat in a treifa meat in a pot, the pot is also treif and affects the other foods. Okay, in fact, that's a deraisa dekisa. Now let's talk a more pleasant, nicer mashal. Let's say I cook parve lakshin in a Fleishig pot. Now, there's no problem of tarfus because it's all kosher. But the question is, what is the status of the parve lakshin? Does it retain its status? Or since you cooked it in a Fleishig pot, maybe the lakshin becomes Fleishigs. And the truth is, it's not so hard to understand this. Because if you cook in a treifa pot, the lakshin becomes treif, right? So if you cook in the same Fleishig ben yoimei pot, lakshin maybe should become Fleishigs. And there are shittas based on a Rashi and Chulin that's exactly true. Parve food that are cooked in a Fleishig ben yoimei become Fleishigs. However, this is not halacha l'maisa, and we have to first explain why not, and then we'll apply this to many shilas. So this is what's called Einat barnat de'atera. Let me explain. When you have a pot that tray for food was cooked in it, so then you put on your Torah glasses and you see that in the walls there's treif. Right? You could see it. I mean, if you have a moon, you could see it. Now you cook potatoes in that treifa pot, so the treifa blias go right into the potatoes. That is treif combining with kosher, and you're left with a treifa tarfus, no doubt about it. You'll say, wait a second, but that tarfus, by the time it gets to the potatoes, it's pretty diluted. Let's realize. It went into the walls. Okay, fine. But now it came out of the walls and into the potatoes. So let's call that a tam kolish. It's a weakened, diluted tam. And the answer is you're right. It is undoubtedly a weakened, diluted tam. But that's asa. Tam kolish of issa is asa. Even a little bit tam kolish is asa. So that's why when you cook kosher food in a treifa pot, the food is treif. Now let's reanalyze our simple question. Not chas v'sholem a treifa pot, it's a fleishig pot, glat kosher fleishig pot. You cook the same lakshin. What is this? Fundamentally different. The fleishigs went into the pot, walls, got a little weakened, but it's still vibrant, came out, it's still vibrant, and went into the water, into the lakshin. Now, you take out your Torah glasses, what do you see? What kind of fleishigs do you see in this lakshin? It's called a nat bar nat de'atera. It went into the walls, it went out, and dispersed in the lakshin, and you know something? The lakshin is perfectly mutter. Because nothing happened. At worst, what is it? Fleishigs? A tam kolish of fleishigs. Fine. There's nothing wrong with being tam kolish of fleishigs. Now, you want to add cheese to that. The Torah says don't cook meat with milk. But tam kolish of fleishigs is barely fleishigs. Now you want to add cheese and you want to say that the tam kolish has the ability to make bas b'chalav? No such thing. Tam kolish of treif is treif. Tam kolish of bas is just that, a weakened meat flavor, diluted, doubly diluted. Does that have the ability to connect with cheese and make bas b'chalav? Absolutely not. I'll give you a mashal. If you remember Gersh Liankasa, when you play basketball, so when you bounce the ball onto someone's glasses, you break his glasses probably, right? Now, let's say that it bounces on the floor, and then the second bounce, it hits someone's glasses. If you did a good bounce, it also breaks the glasses. But the third bounce, it's just ineffective. It can't break glasses. That is not barnat de'atera. The fleishigs from the meat, from the meat that you cooked in the pot, bounced into the wall. The pot, fine, it's still there. It bounces out into the water parve lakshin. Oh, issa. Now it's kam kolish of meat. Now, after the lakshin is made and you put cheese in, you want to make an issa, that is already beyond the double bounce. It lost its potency. This is what's known as not barnat de'atera. Because the lakshin in the worst scenario is not treif. But the same not barnat de'isura, which means you cooked parva lakshin in this treifa pot. You don't have to create the issa. The issa is there. It went into the walls and came out. It's only a tam kolish. The Torah asked a tam kolish, just like regular tam. So that's why in the first case, when you cook lakshin in a treifa pot, the lakshin is treif, tam kolish is treif. When you cook lakshin in a fleishig pot, it's a tam kolish after the second bounce. Now you want to add cheese, that it's not effective enough, it's not powerful enough to make basa b'chalav. Now, the truth is, what I told you is there's actually two hesberim in the Rishonim. What's the svar of tam kolish? Either we assume that after tam kolish there is no more fleishigs, or there is, you could even detect it, discern a little bit, but it is not potent enough to make basa b'chalav. Whatever the case is, this is the beauty of our sugya of tam, of not de'atera, which means the first tam goes into the pot walls, that's not, nice and tam. It bounces out, that's a bar nat, and it goes into parva food, it retains its parva status. Now, a little more b'yesa bi or b'yesa gishmak, let me just add, the Issa Veheta, one of the earliest Gedolei Achrayim in Siman Lamed Daled, he discusses nat bar nat, and then he says, but if you bake parva bread in an oven that you first smeared a fat, Fleishig, a fat of course, in the oven, so that bread becomes Fleishig bread, and you shouldn't eat it. You're not going to make Fleishig bread. Not bar nat. He says, no, that's not bar nat. That's mamoshes. You put fat is fat is straight, it's Fleishigs. So it's not bar nat. If you cooked it, we'll soon see you baked it in a Fleishig oven that's clean. Oh, so that would be a not bar nat heter. But don't confuse, that's my point, don't confuse not bar nat and mamoshes. If you have some residue, Fleishig gravy or the like, so that's Fleishigs. So we have to make that clear distinction. Okay. Now, let us focus on this lakshin that l'chayr we just said is not banat atera, and it's still parva. But when you look at the lashon of the Gemara in Chulin Kufid Alf Mabeis, dagim she'olu b'kara mutta la'achlam b'kusach. So the reading of the Gemara seems to indicate that this case of not banat atera, if you added cheese, then you could eat the lakshin with the cheese. The Gemara speaks about fish, but it's a little complicated because we don't mix fish with milk or with meat, but I'm talking about lakshin, okay? So the Gemara says if you mix this lakshin with cheese, you can eat it. So the question is, wait a minute, so why can you lechatchila add cheese? And from the Gemara's mashma, and that's the way the Ramah says in Siman Tzadikei Siv Beis, this lakshin is taka parva, but don't add cheese. You could have the lakshin with ketchup if you want, and then have milchig afterwards, because it's fundamentally parva. But don't add cheese lechatchila. The question is, why not? Make up your mind. If it's parva, why can't I add cheese? So to make a long story short, that lemaisa there is still some type of milchigs in it. In fact, some rishonim hold that it's considered fleishigs. So you can't just negate that. So don't add cheese lechatchila. What's probably also true, and this is a cheshbon we'll see throughout the sugya today, Chazal don't want you to start playing games. You mix fleishig pat and the lakshin, you'll add cheese. The more you're going to add cheese to the lakshin, and when that was worse than that was maybe we'll soon see fried is different, and maybe maybe you'll put the cheese into the pot itself. It's very confusing, and especially parva foods, because the mila becomes the chesaron. You think it's parva, what's the big deal? But we'll soon see some cases that the lakshin might have a din of fleishigs, a little residue. So you have to try to keep this harchaka, this separation. But the Ramah says, and I quote, if you cooked the lakshin or in a fleishig pat, a minig lesa lechatchila ubediavad mutter b'chol inyan. If you cook the lakshin in this fleishig pat, don't add cheese. If you did add cheese and you asked Rabbi, what should I do? He says, eskazun tehait. Once it's mixed. Now the truth is, you say, well, make up your mind. Is it parva or not? The answer is it is parva. And that's why b'diavad you could even eat the cheese with the lakshin. But keep this harchaka, don't add lechatchila. But before we apply this more specifically, there is one difference for Ashkenazim versus Svardim, and each person will hold his minig. The implication of the Gemara is lechatchila don't mix. What does that mean, lechatchila don't mix? So the way the Mechaba seems to hold, of course it's not so clear in the Mechaba, but if you look in the Shach, Sifkat and Gimel, and the Kaf HaChaim, Sifkat and Aleph spells it out beautifully. The Mechaba also agrees that it's not perfectly parva. In other words, the lakshin is not perfectly parva. Lechatchila don't mix. What does it mean, lechatchila don't mix? That means don't be a chacham and cook the lakshin, lechatchila, in a fleishig pot. Because then you're breaking the barriers, it's not healthy. But let's say, so you cook the lakshin to make fleishigs. And they eat the fleishigs. You cook lakshin to make spaghetti and meatballs. Wonderful, good shidduch. And you have leftover lakshin, spaghetti. So the mechaba, that's mutter. Now you're allowed to add cheese lechatchila. The problem is lechatchila to cook the lakshin to use the other men. That's playing games. Once you cooked it beheta, you could add cheese lechatchila. So lechatchila is going on cooking it. The Ramah is a little more machmir, and he says no. Lechatchila means don't add cheese lechatchila. When is it mutter? B'diavad, when you added cheese. But let's say you have the lakshin that was made, the spaghetti was made to eat with meatballs. and you have leftover spaghetti, don't add cheese unless it's b'diavad, it's mutter. So all agreed is lachatchila and b'diavad. Svardim would touch lachatchila to mean don't cook it to mix. Ashkenazim would say lachatchila don't mix it. Once it's mixed, it's mutter. Now again, to apply this lamais, I'll give you a perfect mashal. I'm in a yeshiva, Baruch Hashem, we have dishes all the time. The Baruch Hashem would go down to supper, and again, there's spaghetti and meatballs in two separate pots. The spaghetti was cooked in a Fleishig pot, as a daf zayin. If it's a Fleishig meal, cook the luxury in a Fleishig pot, even though it's strictly parva. And a Sfar the Shabacha decides he doesn't want to have any Fleishigs, he wants to have coffee later. So he runs down the first one, and he sees a big pot of parva luxury that was cooked in a Fleishig pot. No one's mixed, no one added meatballs by mistake. It's still clean. So he scoops out a bowl of spaghetti. He's allowed to take cheese and have luxury and cheese, gesund to hate. Because for him, it was made beheta. The Ashkenazi bacha should not do that. Because then he can't add cheese lechatchila to that same luxury. If he added cheese and then asked the shayla, so then it's mutter for him as well. Very often ice cream, even today, is made on dairy equipment. In other words, the machinery used makes ice cream. Of course, there's some cooking process of making ice cream. And I'm talking about Challah Yisrael ice cream. I'm not going to get involved with the blias of Challah Stam. It was you make it on milchig dairy equipment, and then they make a run of parva ice cream, which of course strictly parva with a very good hechsher. The question is, can you have the parva ice cream in a Fleishig meal? Because again, it was made on milchig kelim, and they were assuming it's a ben yoimai. So this is mamash our sugya. Let's look at the ice cream that was made on this machinery. How would you characterize it? Not barnat, they're teira, right? And even if it was made of milk kelim, but it went in, came out. So that's why to have it after Fleishigs is perfectly mutter. No one holds. What? Wait. No, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a chilek. Wait, 1 second. The pashtus, the fact that it was made to eat, not banat, and you're not mixing with Fleishigs. The Minchas Yitzchak in two tshuvas, Chelik Tes, Ayin Zayin, and Chelik Gid, also Ayin Zayin, incidentally, he was asked this question. He said, you can't eat the parva ice cream, because the derech, he says, either to eat the ice cream with meat, or when there's still meat in your mouth. So what he's saying is the fact that even though it's soinen, it doesn't make a chilek. We don't mix the chatchila, not barnat, with the other min. So his assumption is that you're eating it together is a problem. I agree to that also. But if people finish the Suda and there's no meat in their mouths and they're not eating with the meat, l'chayr l'chatchila, you could have that parva ice cream with a Fleishig Suda. And that's the cloud. We'll soon see that when you want to market an item that was made strictly parva, but you should not l'chatchila make it on dairy equipment and sell it as parva. Because you're making it that people should use it with Fleishig. That's wrong. Question, very common question. A person cooked eggs in a milchig ben yoimei. I'm talking today everything ben yoimei until otherwise indicated. He cooked eggs in a milchig pot in the morning after making milchig farina. And he made half a dozen eggs and no one ate the eggs. He goes, oh great, I saved time for Erev Shabbos preparations. I'll toss those eggs into the challah and we'll have a gishmaka challah eggs tomorrow. So this is mamish our sugya. Because even though the pot was perfectly clean, but the eggs were cooked in a milchig ben yaimei pot. So for a Sfardi, it was made to eat milchigs. You could put it in the challah l'chatchila. For an Ashkenazi, that you don't do. If someone did it and asked later, the challah will be mutter. But I want to make one point. You're talking about eggs. It's kedai to mention, if you cook eggs in a challah, it's not just a not barnat, was. The Shulchan Aruch in Tzadikei Beis gives a mashal of a Fleishig of food that sometimes is an egg. The egg has a protective shell around it. Very good. But when you cook an egg in challah, you will see that the egg turns brown and has the flavor of challah because the egg shell is perfectly porous and the blias go through, mamashes goes through. So an egg that's made Fleishigs is Fleishigs. If someone cooked an egg, it's a rare case, he cooked a challah egg and took it out and added cheese to the challah egg, he could deposit it in the nearest trash can. because that would be basa b'chalav, a mixture of basa b'chalav. Because the egg is considered fleishig, not just a nat barnat, and he added milk. But to have this egg that you made from milchigs, but it was again in a clean milchig ben yoimai, at the end of the day it's a nat barnat tateira. We shouldn't add it to challah, but if it was added, b'diavad it's mutter. Let's say fakir, you cooked eggs in a fleishig pot for a Shabbos Suda. Why not? You have a Shabbos Suda fleishigs. And then afterward, hey, let me give the children eggs with butter or whatever, with cheese. So again, that's also not right l'chatchil to make that mixture. That's fakir. That's a napanat, a fleishigs. Don't add milchigs. Question, interesting question. A person made potato salad from a lava malka, a parve potato salad. But since lava malka was really parve, milchigs, they cooked the potatoes in a milchig pot, which makes sense because you're having a milchig and lava malka. Then they realize they have a big volume of potato salad. Can we serve the potato salad by a Shabbos Suda of Fleishigs? They were very makbid. It's parve. Potatoes cooked in milchig pot, but the onions were cooked with a parve, cut with a parve knife. Everything was strictly parve. The only issue was the potatoes were cooked in a milchig ben yoimai. Can you serve that with a Fleishig Suda? So the emes is, in halacha, it's hard to say that it's asa. Because you're not eating it with meat, you're having it with a Fleishig Suda. If you have a piece of meat, and then you have a potato salad afterwards, and there's no meat in your mouth at that time, you're not combining it. So it's like having zeh chazeh. It's like the Minchas Yitzchak's case of having, that we said, ice cream after a Fleishig Suda. But if there's meat in your mouth and you have a particular potato salad, so it's like what the Minchas Yitzchak said, the ice cream goes into your mouth with meat. So if it becomes eating together that not barnat potato salad with fleishigs, it shouldn't be done l'chatchila. But l'maisa, what we could say is, if the Bnei Abayis want to do this, you could announce the potato salad is strictly parva, but don't eat it together with meat. Now my guess is that Bnei Abayis will say, listen, I don't know what are you talking about. You and your Shulchan Aruch, you'll make the whole house tray. Leave me alone with this not banat. This is potato salad, that's milchigs. Okay. I don't think they accept the Ramos Kula, but Lamaisa, if they say fine, so you can just say keep the potato salad strictly parva. Let's say someone by mistake dropped a piece of meat into potato salad, not the end of the world. Because then you have a b'di'eved, and even the Ramah will make that the potato salad b'di'eved would be mutter. But b'kitzah, if your person wants to serve it and keep it separate, you don't have to have mashgiach tmidi watching every moment, because even if some mixture happened, it's a b'di'eved that's mutter. Now, the next question introduces us to an extremely important yesod. A person cooked or fried an onion to add it to his chopped liver, which of course is fleishigs. And the problem is he didn't realize that he used a milchig frying pan to fry these onions. Now he has an interesting shidduch. He has a liver which is fleishigs, and he has onions that were fried in a milchig pan. But the good news is that the milchig pan was not used for a few days. It's an eine ben yoimei. So he has the chayra, an interesting shidduch here. He has fleishig liver and onions that were cooked in a milchig pot. The two redeeming factors are that this is an eine ben yoimei, which we know doesn't have much power, as we'll soon see. But more so, this is a not banat dehatera. And he's a b'di'evet person because it's mixed already. So this is pasha, that's mutter. However, here we come to a big sugya, which of course is not for today, it's a sugya for itself. But that's something called a dava charif, a sharp item, a sharp food that is. Onions is one example, Paiskim say, onions, radishes, garlic. Now, dava charif has this ability of turning an eine ben yoimai into a ben yoimi, to revitalizing and refreshing even a stagnant, stale blia. So when you see with your Torah eyeglasses and you see the onion now, this has a revitalized taste of the milchig frying pan. More so, the koyach of a dava charif is to make a noisein tam into a mamoshes. That's what the Ramah says in Sadakei Siv Beis, and he spells this out. If you cooked a dava charif in a milchig pat lamashal, so even though it's an eine ben yoimai, and even though you might say it's a nat barnat, it's not a nat barnat. because the davacharif revitalizes both the eini ben yoimai stagnant taste and turns a nat banat into a mamoshes. So that's really why, as the Shach explains, the churfei, the tavlin, mashvile kilu ha'issa be'en, umashvila ben yoimai. So there's a good reason to believe that the liver would be also even b'di'evet. Now there are some other factors. The fact that you had oil first, and I can't get into it now. If this ever happens, it's kedai to ask a shayla, but be very extra careful when you're dealing with a davar charif that nat banat does not usually apply. And I'll give you another mashal, and that is a person was not as mistaken as his friend. He just cut an onion with a milchig knife. So this is even less than a nat banat. There's no bishul, there's no heat. But as we know, that's the same property of a davar charif, an onion, that it's able to revitalize without heat the fact that you have a knife that's duchat sakina, but besides that, the onion, so the combination is you look at the onion and you see a real milchig content in the onion. And again, it's very reasonable to assume that if you dice the onions with a milchig knife, even eini ben yoimai, and added it to liver, that might even be yasa even b'di'evet. And again, ask a shayla first, but I would like to stress this as much as I can. We're talking today, the rest of this year is not a davar charif. A davar charif has its own halachos, and please follow the minig Yisrael that's based on poiskim. Maintain a parve knife at all times, especially for uses with onions, because onions sometimes end up on the Fleishig with milchigs, and if you have an onion that's parve, you're a step ahead of the game. I would advise have a few parve knives, because you always can never find the knife when you need it, and you get frustrated and you end up using the wrong knife. If you have a few of them, hopefully you'll find at least one of the many when you need it. But again, parve, onions, you have to make sure you maintain the parve and not use a knife of the wrong min. We had a shayla in the yeshiva. Someone was Fleishig, and he wanted to have a pizza, but you can't have pizza after Fleishig. So he wanted to cut off the crust from the pizza, and he said he checked carefully. There's no cheese. No, this pizza, the crust, the cheese didn't go to the crust. So I says, why don't you have plain bread? So he said, well, this has a pizza flavor. I said, oh, you're talking some zach now. Why do you think it has a pizza flavor? Because both the cheese and the tomato sauce has a lot of shamnunis, has a lot of flavor. And when you bake the pizza, that spreads. So now the pizza crust is not a benign parve bread, it's a tafshil shel chalav. And we don't have tafshil shel chalav after Fleishigs. So again, I'm trying to bring out that sometimes you're talking about mamoshes, or close to that, not just a nat banat. He assumed that a pizza nat banat, and that's not true. One not true, but not true it's not. Next question, another illustration of this. A person goes into a takeout food and buys parve French fries. He asked the fellow that works in the store, how is this made? Strictly parve, we add no other ingredients. Okay, so far so good. Now let's see what's doing behind in the kitchen. So I'm not saying all stores, I'm not saying any store, I'm saying most stores. And do your homework before you apply it to your store. But I'm talking about now takeouts, caterers, simcha, caterers, yeshivos, camps. Anybody that deep fries food, and deep fried could mean French fries and falafel balls and knishes and barekis. But most deep fried foods are deep fried in oil. Now, the mitzias is you don't use oil once and throw it out. It's first of all costly to keep changing the oil. And more so, it's difficult to change the oil. The mitzias is, whether you like it or not, the oil is reused and reused and reused. Sometimes it's so much you reuse that the color changes. It has a whole new appearance. Bekitza, a Fleishig takeout, definitely, unless he has two separate deep fries, definitely deep fry schnitzel and steak and chicken, whatever it is, in the same deep fryer. So, of course, the French fries and ingredients are parve. But if you look at the oil that they deep fried schnitzel, and there might be some, remains of other schnitzel in the same oil, so now the oil has to be treated as minimally a tafshil shalbasa. So it's not a mere, the fact that the deep fry is Fleishig, so it's not banat. If they deep fry in the same oil, parve and Fleishig, so the oil is Fleishig, and so is the food that is deep fried. So a simple French fries or falafel balls or knish can be at least should be considered Fleishigs. Now, that's why Lamaisa, if you ask him, and he's an Ishnema, he says, no, we have two separate deep fryers, one for Parve, one for Fleishig. It's not unreasonable. It could happen, fine, Yeshivos, a lot of them have two separate deep fryers. So I'm not saying about any store, every store, I'm saying know the facts before you apply the halacha. Now, the truth is that if you have real mamashis, the oil should be considered like Fleishigs. Now, waiting 6 hours is something that's really a different share. I can't get into that now. But if you could assume that there's very little Fleishigs in the oil, maybe the Fleishigs is bottled and those 6 hours are waited. Someone may even, if stomach case, because there's no much of the Fleishigs in the French fries. But again, typically the waiting 6 hours is a different question than our sugya. But French fries and falafel balls that are strictly parva, if they're deep fried in Fleishig oil, should be treated in this regard like Fleishigs. You can't add cheese, and even b'diavad it could be a problem of basa b'chalav. Some people like to have hot challah by a Shabbos Suda. What's the eitzah? Simple. You put the challah on top of a challah pot, and you keep it long enough, and the challah gets hot. But the truth is that where the problem comes from the maila, because you want to have hot challah, and you say, well, why not put it on top of the pot? But if it starts to get hot, obviously the heat is coming from the challah pot. The challah pot is generating heat of Fleishigs. And since there's plenty of zeya going into the cover of the challah, and that could penetrate and go into the challah, we have to be chayshish that at least the crust of the challah becomes Fleishigs. Not a mere nat bar nat. This could be, again, the zeya that penetrates and goes into the moist challah crust. So whether it goes on the whole challah or just on the crust is something, not for now, there's a big sugya, but I definitely could say that if you want to have hot challah, it might become Fleishigs. Now there are two problems with that. First of all, you shouldn't be eating with fish, and more so you can have it from lava malka to make French toast for leftovers. If you want to keep the challah strictly parva, so either you put a sheet of aluminum foil or put the challah in a aluminum pan, and then we could say it doesn't penetrate through the pan and into the challah, it stays in the pan or the aluminum foil, and that would keep the challah as strictly parv. Now, if lamaisa someone ate the challah that was put on top of a challah pot, I saw the Shev Rakasi and Aleph Reish Zayin says he doesn't have to wait 6, and then he wants to have milchigs after just the challah. He ate just that challah crust. You don't have to wait 6 hours. That's not fleishigi enough. That requires 6 hours. In other words, he put the challah onto the fleishig challah, and he had that challah from Avmalki. Somebody said, "Oh, you shouldn't have eaten it. It was put on top of the challah pot." Okay, but it still doesn't have to wait 6 hours. So then he can have the rest of the Avmalki, the milchig, and that's fine. So I heard this original shayla. I never heard this before. Someone had a milk baby bottle, and he wanted to warm it. So he decided to be a little original and put it into a parva urn. So it definitely warmed quickly. But now you have to rethink if the urn, at least the water in the urn, became milchigs. Because again, the milk is milchigs, of course. And because there's so much heat surrounding it, the hot water, first the heat of the bottle, the milk, goes into the bottle. And the heat from the water extracts those blias, and you might have a milchig urn on your hand. So the eitzah is, if you have a yetzirah to do that, probably better to put in parva formula, and then you have no shaylas. But a milchig bottle immersed in a baby bottle could be a serious problem that makes the urn milchigs. Some people have, this child comes up also when you have a milchig, a chocolate bar, that you want to melt it to put it onto into a food, milchig food. So you decide, that's the big deal, let me put it into this urn. Or somebody that's enclosed well, put in something hot of the other min. That's a problem because it could go through the covering and into the water. Another important question, and again, these questions come up very often by simcha, is you have a vegetable soup that's strictly parva, but it's part of a fleishig meal, so they make it understandably in a fleishig pot. The truth is, better to keep fleishigs, even if it's a parva soup, keep it in a fleishig pot. You don't start mixing parva and milchig that's touching, keep it fleishigs, fine. So everybody's eating fleishig, what's the big deal? One person his coffee is more than the whole fleishig meal, so he takes the pot before everybody touches it, and pours it into his milchig bowl, and wants to have the soup in his milchig bowl with a milchig spoon, and he wants to today strictly milchigs. So someone said, hey, what are you doing? You're pouring from a Fleishig pot into a milchig bowl. He says, what's your problem? This is not a not by not the hetera. There's even less than that. Why? He didn't cook the soup in the other min. He cooked the soup in a Fleishig pot, right? Sofa not by hetera. And what did he put it into? A milchig bowl. He didn't put it into cheese. Put it in the milchig bowl. What's the problem with that? Does the parve soup in a Fleishig ben yoimai, does that have an ability to combine with a milchig bowl? So you might say, well, why not? If this is hot and it goes into a milchig bowl. So this is a Ramah in Tzaddik Siv Beis. And the Ramah says, don't mix the parve lakshin cooked in a Fleishig bowl with cheese. Dafka to eat the two minim together, this parve food with lamatzi cheese. But if you poured this parve soup, mamash our case, that was cooked in a Fleishig pot into a milchig bowl, you could have it. And you could have it as milchigs. In fact, you could even warm it up again in a milchig pot. The question is, why? Why is that mutter? Why is it different? There's like we said, what do you mean? Because it's a step less than adding cheese. You're having just in a milchig bowl, you're not adding milchigs to the soup. Now the Pri Megadim in Mishpatei Zahav Sivkat and Hay says, but you have to keep some precaution. Don't cook parve soup in a Fleishig bowl with the kavana to pour it into a milchig bowl. That's pushing it. That's breaking the barrier. But let's say it was made beheta the parve soup in a Fleishig bowl, a Fleishig pot ben yoimai, and you poured it into your milchig bowl, then it's fine, and you have no problems with the fact that it's merging from Fleishigs to milchigs. So a good mashal would be, like you want to, like we said, this is the soup, retains its parve status, and you kept your precaution. Next question is in Yana Diyayma. You have a Fleishig Suda, okay? And you have latkes or potato blintzes, everything is strictly parve. But you want to, again, keep to the rules. So if you fry those latkes or the potato blintzes in a Fleishig pot, can you then add, and you take it right out of the pot, and you want to add sour cream? We don't do that l'chol days. No one adds milk to parve latkes that are made in a Fleishig frying pan. That's the chol days. But this case was very different. These people, for whatever reason, they fried the latkes or the potato blintzes in a parve pan. Which might get confusing, but that's what they did. And since it's a Fleishig meal, they put all the sizzling hot latkes into a Fleishig tray, a ben yoimai tray that was just used for the meat knishes. But it was washed well. They put sizzling parve latkes that were fried in a parve pan into a Fleishig bowl. And again, this milchig person, by him the coffee is more than the whole suda, he grabs out 3 latkes. Can I put cheese onto these latkes? So, you think about it, this is not any of the previous cases. You're not even putting it into a bowl that maybe you could say it starts to cook. You're putting it onto a flat serving tray. So this is our original Gemara. Dogim she'olu b'ka'ara. Which means you didn't even cook, you didn't add, like in the first case, you cooked the parve soup in a Fleishig bowl. Here you didn't even do that. You fried the parve latkes in a parve frying pan. What's the worst crime you did? Olu b'ka'ara. You put it onto a Fleishig serving plate. So that, the halacha is muta la'achlam b'kutach. In that case, the Paiskim seem to say, and the lashon of the Ramah is im loinis bashle nitzlu tchilak olu b'kli muta la'achlan im chalav atzmai v'chein lehepach. In other words, the fact is that you put it onto a Fleishig tray is not enough to make it a problem of adding cheese. Now, of course, the Paiskim, Beis Yosef, the Taz point out, don't fry parva latkes in a parva frying pan with das to put it onto a fleishig tray, and people can take off what they want. Because that again is making a breach in the separation. Don't make kunsin. But once it was done and it was put onto the fleishig tray, that's dogim. It's alu b'ka'ara and mutta la'achlam b'kutach. In other words, it's basically too diluted to be a problem to add cheese even lechatchila. So now you could add the cheese, of course. If the same latkes or blintzes were made in a fleishig frying pan, that's very different. That's the original case that you don't add cheese. So you see, once you get the yesod, I think everything is simple. But I think what I would like to mention is, you cooked in a parva food in a fleishig pan has one halacha. Pouring it into a milchig bowl is the second stage. And the biggest kula is parva in a parva, and you put it onto a fleishig tray, that's the least of the problems. Next question. A person was fried a slice of eggplant, which is of course strictly parva, and in a fleishig pan. Okay, so far so good. Nothing wrong with a eggplant. Now, what is an eggplant? What is an eggplant right now? L'chayra, not barnat. The Torah, right? He didn't ask questions. He added cheese and he put it into the tawai. He grilled it, whatever. Now we have this fried eggplant in a fleishig frying pan, and cheese was added. So he asks you, oh, no, what's the halacha? You say, oh, I know the halacha. This b'di'eva, you did it, right? Eskazun to hate. No. Why not? So here we have the Shach in Sifkat and Dal, quotes a Marshal. Marshal says the heta of not barnat b'di'evad, when you add a cheese to the lakshin, is mutter. You know why? Because really the lakshin between me and you is a third knot, is a third bounce. Because the fleishig went into the fleishig pot, bounced out into the water, from the water into the lakshin. That's too diluted to make problems, but the evad is okay. Even chatchila it could be mutlai for svardim in some cases. But here, the fleishig's bounced out of the frying pan, directly into the eggplant. Tzli, fried, roasted, zokta esveheta is considered fleishigs. Eggplant fried or roasted in a fleishig pan is fleishigs. And according to this esveheta, even b'di'eved, if you add a cheese, you can't eat that food. Now, of course, this is part of a different sugya, and some poskim argue, some poskim agree. But we have to be very clear that frying has a different halacha. Frying gives more of the essence into the food, it goes straight in. And frying, you should not add cheese, and even b'di'evet, to ask a shayla to know if you're allowed to eat that b'di'evet. Another halacha, which is neged to many shaylas. You cooked lakshin in a fleishig pot. What's the shayla? We spoke about that. One fundamental chiluk. You used this pot last Sunday, to finish the leftovers from your challah. You know, it goes from Shabbos to Sunday. But Sunday night it was cleaned. You made the lakshin in that challah pot on Tuesday night. So it's more than an ben yoimai. Same question with the same lakshin. But the pot was used a few days earlier. So this we know, the pot, in the worst scenario, is an ben yoimai of fleishigs, which means that the taste stays fresh 24 hours. Afterwards, it's stale and stagnant. In fact, mi'ikad din halacha lamaisa, if a person cooks milk, real milk, in a fleishig pot, eine ben yoimai, the milk is okay. The pot needs a Yeshua, but the milk is okay because there's no basach, there's stagnant basach. So, in the case of the lakshin, what could be the problem? In other words, the lakshin has a double heta to it. It's a not banat tetera, and it's an Ein Ben Yoimai. And evidently that's why the Ramah says, in the same Ramah, this big sugya, Tzadikei Beis, it's come out the whole sugya, if you cook this parva lakshin in an Ein Ben Yoimai, Nehagin heta lechatchila la'achle min hasheni. So the same lakshin, see that's why it's tricky and don't mix. But the same lakshin, sometimes you can add cheese lechatchila, and sometimes you could. Now the Yamshel Shloima in Perik Chesim and Yud Gimel, Simon Samach Gimel, argues on the Ramah, but Lamaisa, the Ramah is our Ramah, and an Eine Ben Yoimei doesn't have the restrictions of Nat Barnat. Comes again the Chochmas Oda in Memches Beis, and he says that's true. If you cook the lakshin in a challah pot Tuesday night, you could add cheese because to hate. But don't lechatchila take the challah pot to cook your lakshin to add the cheese. And again, it's the same concept. We have to keep some barriers, some protection. Here, in other words, it's funny, but here, the lakshin that you made in the challah pot Tuesday, Ashkenazim are like Sfardim. Because we don't cook the lakshin to add cheese, right? Even Tuesday night. But once it was made, you add cheese l'chatchila. So then we're like Sfardim with a ben yoyim. But it's the same idea. There has to be some barrier. Okay, so put it lamaisa. You cooked eggs in a milchig pot, right? But the good news is that you made the pot was used last a few days ago. So then, if you made it to make eggs for breakfast and you have leftovers, you can add it to the challah. That challah we said you can't do. This is an Eini Ben Yoyim and fundamentally different. Rabelsky in the Shulchan Alevi Chelik Beis Vav has a very important psak, and he's talking, of course, to food manufacturers, and he says to make parva food, you can't lie and say I'm using an Eini Ben Yoyim, let's say of a Fleishig machinery, and I'm making parva food, and it's Eini Ben Yoyim. He says, don't do that, because the Chacham Azad says you don't cook to serve the other min. So if you want to say it's parva food cooked on Fleishig kelim, and people know what you're doing, no, one thing. But to market it as strictly parva, you're being machshel, the kainim, and they're violating the Chacham Azad. So again, it's the same yisod. You can't sell it as strictly parva if it's not really strictly parva. Another question I wondered about, let's say I'm making a big pot of lakshin, I'm making it for the Shabbos Suda. But I have in mind, one child likes lakshin and cheese Friday for lunch. I'm making the bulk of it for Fleishigs. I'm making a little bit to serve with the milchigs. Or I'm making it, let's say, a lot of people, most people eating Fleishigs, and some are going to have it with one add cheese. So you look at Roiv, or since there is a little bit of a using the other min, so the new Sefer Psakim with Chuvah Amakuf Ayin Ches, he proves it from a Maral Bach, that in this case, since the whole thing is a Chumrah, you could go Basar Roiv. So if you're making it Ikka for Fleishigs, those that could take off a little bit for Milchigs, it's like you made it for Fleishigs, then B'di'eved, so to speak, you're allowed to add cheese to this little amount. Question, a person he wants to have a coffee, and he has no spoon to mix it except for a Fleishig spoon. Is there any way to mix a milchig coffee with a Fleishig spoon? So I heard already the eights, if you're lamdan, you'll mix it with your pen, but we're not such a lamdan. That's also not going through the sugya right. So the emes is, if the Fleishig spoon is an Eini Ben Yoyim, you have an eitzah. You have to be a little practical. You first put in the coffee and the sugar, and then mix the coffee with the Eini Ben Yoyim, even though it's a Fleishig Eini Ben Yoyim, then you could add milk. Because this already is a not banat for Eini Ben Yoyim. But of course, if it's a Ben Yoyim, then you can't mix it, because then it has a not banat of Fleishig's Ben Yoyim, and that you shouldn't add milk l'chatchila. I'll tell you an interesting shayla. Rapam Tzachar gave many years. He gave this year a day, and he gave for hairs. So one of the questions he asked, of course, everybody was challenged. He says, you took a Fleishig pot, a Ben Yoyim, you cooked, and it was perfectly clean. You cooked water in it, and you didn't realize it's Fleishig. You thought it was milchigs, and you made a milchig coffee. What's the halacha with the coffee? Simple shayla that every rav could get occasionally. Clean and Ben Yoyim pot, water, added coffee and milk. So everybody says, well, this is a case of not banat teira. What's the problem? So of course, if he asked the question, there's got to be a catch to it. Is it mutar l'chol hadayis? So the answer is no. Why not? I hope you're able to get smicha soon. You have to know the answer to this question. He says very pashut, because if you boiled water, so light the marshal, that's tzli. You boiled water with lakshin, so then it goes into the water into the lakshin. But if you boil plain water, so light the marshal, the water is considered like tzli, and light the marshal is considered fleishiks, and even b'di'eved the coffee would be awesome. Now that's a chiddush first. Some are more makel than the marshal, and some say water. Who said it becomes tzli? Maybe a fried eggplant is, but at least we can say it's mutar l'chol hadayis. A fascinating shayla is, which really shouldn't happen, but when people start to mix containers. Now let me just give a point or two. If you put hot Fleishig soup in a container, plastic container, so plastic we assume is beleya. So hot soup in a plastic container becomes Fleishigs. So you shouldn't be using that for milchigs. That's like using a milchig container for Fleishig food. So if something is Fleishigs, it's Fleishigs. Hot soup into milchig soup into a container, it's treated like milchigs. But here's the next question that makes it a little more challenging. You put cold chicken soup, cold, into a milchig container. Okay, and you kept it in the refrigerator for a day and a half. Any shaila on this cold chicken soup? So pashtus, what's the problem? It's cold chicken soup. Very good, but here we come to a concept called kavish k'mevushel. If you soak something for 24 hours, it's like bishul. So it's like you're cooking, quote unquote, cold chicken soup in a milchig container. And the milk container is a ben yoimai. And if your whole kavish k'mevushel applies, then this cold chicken soup is awesome. But here we come to a logistical problem that you have to move beyond. Because you're right, you kavish k'mevushel 24 hours. But you're being kavish in a time of the container was milchigs. Now, let's say that you used the milk container 20 minutes ago. Okay, fine. So then the bell will ring. Oh, now it's an Eine Ben Yoim, it's a Tam Pagum. But the bell for 24 hours, Kavish K'mevushel, did not yet ring. You're 20 minutes off, or even 5 minutes off. But you have to coincide the 24 hours of Kavish K'mevushel to 24 hours of a Tam She'ena Pagum. And unless you're mamash efshalit samtzeim, it doesn't seem to work. Because you're not going to have 24 hours of kavish that it's not at one point becoming an Eine Ben Yoimai. So some poskim say, once it's in effect, it's doing something, the first 23 and a half hours, whatever it is, and the kavish is in effect, it doesn't lose its potency. So that's really a different sugya, which I don't want to get into that. Kavish is a sugya for itself. But again, please keep separate containers or market, parva, Fleishigs and milchigs, because it's very reasonable that you could pour Fleishigs, hot Fleishigs into a milchig container, and that could create a serious problem. Now, we have a shaila that is interesting. Some from a caterer, some from takeout stores, they sell or give items, and they say it's becheskas Fleishigs, which means it's a parva latka. And it's even fried in a parva pans. But it's basically a Fleishig establishment. And they don't want to have the chechrayis. Maybe I touched it with Fleishig hands. They're very firm. It's an halacha move. They want to be protected. This is made parva in a parva kelim. But maybe someone touched it. We're not restricted. We sell everything Fleishigs. Kugel, lahina, that's parva. They sell us cheskas Fleishigs. Can you have that with milchigs or have it and have milchigs afterwards? And the same shaila comes up in the yeshiva where you look into the lakshin, when it comes out of the oven, it's not made strictly parva, fine. But after a while, one fella sticks in a spoon that he just used for the meatballs, and who knows what, you find everything, and it's the samamashis. So this is a beautiful sugya, but to make a long story short, the Ramah in Yeridea Peites Gimel says that if you have basa, shenis bashal, they say parva food that was bashal b'gedera shel basa, you're allowed to have milchigs afterwards. Parva foods in a fleishig contain that milchig afterwards. So frek teshach, what do you mean? That's a nat banat. You could even have it together b'di'evet. What's the chiddush afterwards? So he says no, there's a chiddush, because this is talking about that the pot that you cooked was a loy hutcha. It was not klerish loy hutcha yaf. It wasn't cleaned well. A little bit mamoshes still remained in the pot. So maybe taka, it's parva food, but a little mamosh, let's say, if the fleishigs remained. Kamash Milan, that you could have fleishigs after, you could have milchigs afterwards. We negate the loy hutcha yafa. So the shaila is, what is it? Why are you negating the mamoshes? Terry says it's not mamoshes. It's a little bit residue that's probably bottle. So if it's bottle, there's no residue. So it's regular, not banat, they're teira. So then you could have milchigs afterwards. So here, hoping in a yeshiva, in a camp, that people are responsible, they're not sticking fleishigs mamish into the lakshin. If you look and you don't see any fleishigs, I mean, if you see mamashas, of course you have to realize it's fleishigs. If you don't see mamashas, you could assume, in the worst scenario, it's loy hutcha yafa, And basically, we could assume that it's batel, so you could have that lakshin plain, and then have milchigs afterwards. Can I add cheese to that lakshin? Teretz says, even without hut chiyafa, like hut chiyafa. This is a not we don't do that. B'di'evet, I added lakshin, and maybe someone has some residue there, here and there. Like hut chiyafa, we could assume it's batel, and you could eat it with b'di'evet. If it was mixed, you could eat it as it is. The last question, of course, is an important question, and that's with an oven, the question of an oven. And basically, an oven, of course, as you know, is a share for itself, but I want to at least say the points that in a Negei Lamaisa, a challah baked in a Fleishig oven, that's clean. Typically, people clean the oven. It was not kosher. The Fleishig oven that was used 3 hours for Fleishigs, but it was clean in between. Can I eat is the challah considered Parve? Is it considered Fleishigs? So basically, if you cook food in a Fleishig pot, it's a nat hetera, and you don't eat it with milchigs. But here's the chiddush of challah, or any type of food like challah, cake as well, that's not maziyah harbe. Challah basically is a food, a dry food, that doesn't have vapor and steam like challah or like cheese. If it's baked in a Fleishig oven, it doesn't have enough of the koyach to extract the blias in the wall. Don't forget, there are blias of Fleishig in the wall. But how does the blias from the wall affect the challah that's baking peacefully? So if you put cheese pie in the oven, and the cheese pie is maziyah and makes zayah and combines with the Fleishig in the walls, so then the oven and the food becomes a problem, a serious problem, as we know in Hilchos Bas V'Challah. But if it's just challah or cake or something like that, that's not maziyah, then you could treat the challah as retaining its parva status. Not only could you have it with fish, but you could have it with milchig also. It is basically a parva challah. If there's mamoshes, if the oven is dirty, fleisha mamoshes, of course you have to make sure there's no mamoshes. But a clean challah, a clean oven to bake a challah, even ben yoimei, and kol she'eini ben yoimei is considered parva. There's some a little more machma and say wait till the oven is eini ben yoimei, but mikidin, this is what most poskim say. However, of course, obviously very different, if you bake a kugel in the same oven with chicken that's uncovered, so you have a real problem of the kugel being fleishigs. Because the zayah goes up from the chicken, and the chicken has plenty of zayah, and goes into the kugel and makes that fleishig. The question is, you have to wait 6 hours after the kugel. That's for the next year, a different time. But definitely the kugel should be considered like fleish lagabi, not to have it with milchis, no doubt about that. If the kugel was properly covered, people say double covering, of course that's better. Even a single cover, it's done well, and nothing went in. So then concurrently being cooked with chicken is of no consequences. If it didn't end up mixing, you could keep the kugel definitely separated, the chicken on one side. If they're both uncovered, that's where the problem is. I will talk to you all.
O-U-D-E is Parve? O-U-D-E.
I said the first, I'm not getting, it was not, it's
O-U-D-E, on the cereals. On the cereals, they have O-U-D.
Nobody's in Kaddish?
They won't say. Shem Egan Shir, like you big as a character of Smith for today's shir. Schedule for this week, the 1:30 shares on the Bima. After Mincha of Smith, Bezra Hashem will say,